Okay, we're starting Siman Kuf Nun Vav, which you were learning this week. I'm going to be talking about Sifim Aleph through Gimel. Kuf Nun Vav is an interesting thing in Siman Kuf Nun Vav, which you don't have much in other Simanim in Choshen Mishpat, or Bechlal in Shulchan Aruch. The Beis Yosef gives you a general introduction to the whole Siman before you start it, a few pages long. But it's easy and it's geschmack, divides the Siman into three. Because now that we finished, there's Nezakim that you're machzik in your own karka, there's Nezakim that you do in the Nezakim that you cause somebody from something that you do in your own karka, there's Nezakim that you cause, that's what we learned before, there's Nezakim that you do or usage that you do on somebody else's karka, what kinds of chazakas there are, and now we're coming to different kinds of nezakim. This siman, essentially the first 3-4 seifim really belong previous simanim because it's a hemshech of nezakim that a person does in his property that causes a hazak to somebody else or within. But being that the bulk of Siman Kuf Nun Vav talks about hasagas gvul, what we call hasagas gvul, which is, or it's really the real word would be for it, hasagas gvul according to Torah means moving the borders, but it's not what today we call hasagas gvul. Be'etzem it's yered l'omnes chavere, that you are encroaching on somebody else's business, and that refers to chanus, store, businesses, certain jobs that you do. So therefore, the beginning of the siman starts with the halachas which are relevant to stores and hazekas which are caused by you having a store, you having a business, you having an operation inside your house which caused damage to somebody else. So that's how the Beis Yosef essentially divides it. The first part of the siman is nezakim that you cause your neighbors from something that from a business operation of sorts that you do in your own property. So, and then afterwards it goes into hasagas gvul, into yered l'omnes chavere, which is also in business. So Mechaber begins, if you have a mavoi she'einoi mefulish. Yeah, you already know what mavoi she'einoi mefulish is. We spoke about it 100 times last year in the Chassidovin. Whoever is not here, whoever was not here, so mavoi she'einoi mefulish, the definition is, now you have chatzeres, and you have a mavoi, you have houses, chatzeres, mavayos, and cities. A house is where you live. A chatzer is a courtyard which has more than one house. A mavoi is a street, a semi-street which leads into the chatzeres. So mavoi could be mefulish or she'einoi mefulish. Mefulish means that it's open from both ends. Einoi mefulish means that it's a dead-end street. So if you have a mavoi she'einoi mefulish, a dead-end street, and one person who lives inside this mavoi, which means it's there's more than one chatzer. A mavoi could have 6 chatzeres, but from chatzer 1, somebody wants to open up to chatzer. Someone wants to open up a business, which is then going to cause. He wants to not manage a business, but he wants to be a doctor. He wants to be somebody who draws blood, someone who teaches a modechel, those are the examples that are given, someone who writes shtadas for people. So the other people could block him by saying, we're not interested in the additional traffic that's going to go through here, because now it's going to take longer. Until now, the only people who came in through the mavoi are the residents. So we handled it. Every person who's a resident has a right to the mavoi. Nobody could say, you can't have more kids because there's going to be more traffic. But each person has a right to the mavoi. But to bring outside people into the mavoi, which generate more traffic, that you could block. And even if one person wants to do it, if one person wants to block it, one out of the 6 people in the mavoi, 6 different chatzeres, each chatzer is 2 houses. You're talking about 12 families, and only one person from one family wants to block it, he has a right to block it. Now, the difference between this seif and the next seif regarding chanus is over here it only says ribui oivrim v'shavim, that a lot of people going through traffic. It doesn't mention that I can't sleep because of the noise. The sleeping because of the noise Even though in the Gemara it seems like it combines all of them, over here the Mechaber splits them. Over here it doesn't mention about the noise. And it seems that it's the reason because the Mechaber does not hold like the Rambam. He holds like the majority of the Rishonim, that the taina of just noise is not enough of a taina to stop somebody in a different mavoi, in a different chotzer, within the same mavoi from doing a business. The only issue is the issue of added traffic. We'll call it. There's more traffic. Takes longer to get in and out of it, and plus it means the Erech Shai says it's not that it's either or. It's that over here, to be able to block somebody from within your same mavoi, from doing from one chotzer to another chotzer, according to the Mechaber, which the Mechaber is going, by the way, the Mechaber, the fact that he mentions chotzer, the fact that he mentions mavoi, the Ramos is only chotzer. The fact that he mentions mavoi, she'eina mefulish, is in itself a chumrah, which is only the Rambam holds. But still, even within that, he didn't go to the extreme of the Rambam. The Erech Shai says the reason is because over here, you need to have a bunch of elements to be able to block somebody. If there is no added traffic, because moving foolish, you don't have a problem. But you have to have added traffic. And there's also an issue, why is it bothering you? Is it bothering you because you can't, because it's a narrow street and now you have to maneuver between people, and there is noise, and Erech Shai says there's also has a kriya. Because until now, I know my neighbors, and they know the fact that we're in the same chotzer means that we are more comfortable with each other. But now you're going to have a bunch of other people coming in and out. I'm not comfortable doing things in front of these people. It turns from a mava into the Reshus HaRabim. And that, I'm not interested in having. Now, the Ramah says that even in mava she'eina mefulish, you cannot be ma'akev, only if it's within the same chotzer. That means if it's within the same chotzer, you could be ma'akev. The Smeh, right in the beginning, says that in the mavoi she'eina mefulish, which is obvious, in mavoi she'eina mefulish, you cannot block. Why? Because over there, being that that's open from both sides, and there's anyways traffic going in and out from one side to another, and therefore you can't say I don't want people going through. There's more people going through. There's more people going through, but they're not people of the mavoi. Up until now, when it's a dead end, the only people who came are the residents and their guests. Sometimes you see in houses where it says in buildings there's a sign, the only residents and their guests are allowed. You're talking about the mavoi mefulish means essentially it's open from both sides and people are allowed to go through it. So the fact that I'm now opening in the same mavoi, I'm a different chotzer, I'm opening in the same mavoi a business which is going to generate more traffic is not going to change the annoyance level that you have. Because you just happen to be annoyed that people have no rights to this mavoi, are still marching right through it. So, and that taina, so therefore, that taina, that's why the Ramah Bechla holds that even the mavoi she'eina mefulish, you can't have such a taina, only by a chotzer. Because by a chotzer, you could say there's more people coming in. By a mavoi, this people is going to go into the other chotzer. They have no shaychus to this chotzer. The only thing that connects me to the other people with the mavoi is that we happen to be that we all use the same access point. But the only time it really bothers me is if it's within the same chotzer. The Smeh also continues in Sif Cotton Beis, that this is essentially considered a hezek gadol, and therefore that's why there's no chazaka, you could say, that we did it, and therefore you could continue doing it. But it's an hezek gadol, which could afterwards a person could be moiche about it, and that's essentially he just tells you what the Mechaber is going to tell you in Sif Daled, which by now you already know. Now, I'm going to jump to Sif Gimel for a second. I'm going to go back to Sif Gimel later. And Sif Gimel, the Mechaber says if it's an inyan shel mitzvah, you're not allowed to be moiche. And we're going to get to it in the Smeh over here writes in Sif Cotton Gimel, that based on that, where it says in the Mechaber later on, so over here, when it says roife, it only refers to a regular doctor, not to a moyel. A moyel is a davar shel mitzvah, and you cannot be ma'akev. And the same thing, when it says sefer, it means somebody who writes shtaros which are not Torah, but the sefer writes mezuzahs and tefillin, you are allowed to. The Taz says no. Taz says you can't extend, and this is a crucial machlokes that the Taz has with everybody else, what means davar shel mitzvah, which you're going to get to later again also. that it doesn't apply, that when it says, you can't extend the davar shel mitzvah to everything. Because you're going to see that, he says, a doctor's matzil is pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh is also a mitzvah. So why can't you stop a doctor from being here? You're going to see later the Chasam Sofer that's mentioned in the first Pesach Tshuva, which is on Sif Beis, says that Parnasa you could also taina that there's a mitzvah to be mefarnas your bnei beis. Yeah. So Taz over here says that it's different. But when it's talking about mitzvah, mitzvah is only talking about what things can you not stop somebody from doing. In the mavoi is something which needs that for the mitzvah to be mekuyim, you need rabbim. And that you need people, that the people should come to you. A doctor doesn't need people to come to him. And at least in those days, you would go, the doctor would come to you. The doctor would bring his bag, and like you see the old drawings in the children's books, the doctor would come with his bag to you and take care of whatever problems you have. And the same thing in Moil also. Moil also doesn't have to, you don't have to bring your kid to the Moil, your Moil could come to you. Huh?
What's an example of something you do that you have to come to you?
A shul is a place that you need 10 people, and they're all going to come in there. Malamed also, he's teaching in his house. Because he can't go, because if a Malamed doesn't teach one kid. You don't have enough of those, you're talking about, let's say you're talking about a village. Yeah, how many Malamedim do you have?
And a doctor.
A doctor also, so in those days, doctor went. Today it's different. I think the Shevet HaLevi points out that opening up a clinic is fine. I think it's the Shevet HaLevi.
What's the story of Yuchal to extend it to all mitzvahs? Because the Gemara itself only says teaching kids.
That's Machlekes Rishonim. Machlekes Rishonim is if the teaching kids is a specific thing for teaching kids, or it's a general exception. And the Beis Yosef goes through it. Beis Yosef says that brings the Ritva to support Fakert, and there's other people which understand that the Ritva doesn't mean that. But that we'll get to when we discuss in Sifgim. I just want to point out about the Mayal. That's a Chasam Sofer in Pesach Tshuva. That's a store in Pesach Tshuva in Chasam Sofer. That's a Chasam Sofer. It's mentioned in Pesach Tshuva. We can get to Sif Gimel. In Sif Beis, huh? No, he doesn't. He gives all the svaras why you can, why you could, and then he says no. Now, let's just point out. Let's continue with the doctor and the Moyel. In Chidushei Chasam Sofer on the Shas, on Baba Basra, on the Sugi over here, Chafam with Beis, he explains that a doctor, he basically has a question on the Taz. He says a doctor ultimately, even though you're going to go, you could do it outside, it means every time a doctor goes, he has to go to somebody's house. How are they going to call the doctor? This is talking about before the days of telephones. Somebody would walk over to the doctor's house, knock on his door, and drag him out, right? So you still have the ribui oivrim v'shavim. And to be able to get to the doctor, all the people have to come call him. So then if it's a mitzvah of pikuach nefesh, then people have to come to him. So then the svara of the Taz still applies. It should be the same as a melamed. Everybody has to come to him. So why are you not allowed to make a roife why could you be ma'akev a roife? So the Chasam Sofer paskins that it's not like that. Paskins explains it's not like that. He says the taka moyel you can't block, and even a doctor you also can't block. Really, medina elamai kacher. So why did the Smeh only mention a moyel and not mention a doctor? Why is not choylek on the mechaber regarding a doctor? And it says a doctor you could be ma'akev. Yeah. So what's this? So the Parmenizov answers that question. The Parmenizov doesn't ask the question. He starts by answering the question, and from that you understand what the question is. Parmenizov says the difference between a moyel and a doctor is a moyel only deals with the Yidden. So every time he goes, it's a mitzvah. The people are going to come call him, and they go to take care of the Jews. So it's not a problem. But a doctor is going to be called also for goyim. And by calling for a goy, it's not the same level of mitzvah. So that's it. You merape goyim together with Yidden is mitzvah darkei shalom. It's not mitzvah the mitzvah. And therefore, because of that, a person can be ma'akev and say, I don't want you to have in a mavim foolish that's going to be people marching in and out, and because of that. So according to that, it seems pretty clear that if you're talking about a city where the vast majority is Yidden, or a neighborhood where the vast majority is Yidden, therefore the vast majority of people coming to the doctor are going to be Yidden, then the svara of the Pamoin Ezov, the way he understands the smeh, would imply that you cannot be ma'akev a doctor. Shevet HaLevi has a very interesting svara in Chelik Tes Siman Reish Tzadik Tes. Huh? Only Yidden, or majority Yidden. Shevet HaLevi in Chelik Tes Siman Reish Tzadik Tes says that if there is, and he bases it on the svara of the Rameh and the Tur, he says that if there is it's not a doctor that people come whenever there's an emergency. It's a clinic which has appointments. And there's a certain amount of people that come at 6 p.m., at 7 a.m., and a certain amount of people come at 8 a.m., and a certain amount of people come at 9 a.m. So it's not an unlimited hezek. It's a mesudadik system. Then it's not this issur of ribu nichnasim doesn't apply. Ribu nichnasim only applies when it suddenly becomes an influx. You don't know when people are going to come, when people are not going to come. But if it's organized, that there's a specific system when somebody comes, when somebody doesn't come, it's not a problem. The Aruch HaShulchan explains totally different, and but he makes it makes the most sense into understanding which roife you could block. He says it's not roife or uman, it's roife uman. That we're not talking about a doctor that treats patients. We're talking about a doctor that's training other doctors. So then he says that's the roife you could block. Otherwise, you take a shaila of mistama because of mitzvah. It doesn't say it's because of mitzvah, but mistama, that's the reason. Shas V'Tshuvas Divrei Makil Chelik Zayin Siman Mem says that even though the Rambam who is the svara of the Mechaber for saying that even a Mavah Shein Mefulish is a problem, he could be Ma'akev as a Das Yochid, and all the Rishonim disagree with him, and therefore, a piece svara you wouldn't have to be chayshish to it, but ultimately, since the Mechaber brought him, it's enough that you should be able to say Kimli to be Ma'akev somebody from doing it. That's the Tshuvas Divrei Makil. Now there is an interesting tashbetz, Chelik Daled Siman Nun Zayin. Because according to the Ramah, only within the same chatzir you could be ma'akev. Yeah, that's the majority of the Rishonim hold that way. But from a chatzir to a chatzir, even within the same mava, even if it's not foolish, you cannot be ma'akev. The tashbet says that when you have from one, if the person who is suffering has all his windows facing the other chatzir, where you're going to start your operation, your thing, then you still could be ma'akev, and that becomes as if it's chatzir achas. And the logic behind it seems to be that why is the mechaber, why is the Ramah mekel from chatzir to chatzir, not within some chatzir? Because ultimately, the majority of the amount of people going through and the amount of noise and everything else gets diluted. When it's from one chatzir to another chatzir, it's much less. But if it's right in front of your nose, then it still becomes a problem because you still have the amount of traffic that's going to go, and therefore it could be considered like the same chatzir. Windows didn't have things. Yeah, but that's only the tashbetz, the das yochid, the rimigash, and other rishonim say that it has nothing to do with the amount of noise from chatzir to chatzir. That that's not because the noise gets less. It's simply because bnei chatzir to another bnei chatzir within the same mavoi, they all have a right to use the mavoi for themselves and for their guests. A chatzir, people within the same chatzir, so they can't. One could say, "I have a right to it. It's only for the people here." But from one chatzir to another chatzir, since when do I, who has a chatzir on one side of the mavoi, could block somebody who has a chatzir on the other side of the mavoi from doing something, when I have equal rights? I have equal rights to him, and it's similar to Oisa B'Seich Shaloi, which we're going to see in the next Seif. Now the Mechaber then continues that if somebody has a house, he should not rent the house to one of these problematic people. The Smen Sivkot Zayin brings what the Tur continues and says that you can't rent it even if you don't find another renter. We're soon going to get to the whole renting situation. The Ramah adds that selling, yesh ayuminim, that it's mutter to sell to one of these people, and afterwards they'll go knock each other out in Bezdin to decide whether what he's doing over there is right or is wrong. And that's why, because the whole sword is you go to Bezdin afterwards, so therefore you should not sell to a guy, because a guy is like tzayis dina. The Smeh explains why. He says, because when you sell to somebody, let's say even somebody's a doctor, and you sell him a house inside the Mavli, who says that he's buying it for the purpose of doing his business over there? Could be he bought it to have a property, a real estate investment, or maybe he bought it to live there, not to do business. Maybe he bought it for renting it out to somebody else. And then you have a suffix, maybe down the line he's going to do the malacha. So hey, since you have a suffix, you can't block him from buying it. And down the line he's going to do the malacha, so you'll deal with him in Bezdin. But when you rent it out to somebody and he's moving his operation from place A to place B, it's clear that he's planning on doing whatever he did before. And therefore therefore you're allowed to block it. Now the Ramah doesn't say the yesh ayuminim that's aser even by mechila. He just says yesh ayuminim that's matter. It seems like that's the opinions he follows. Happens to be that the Tur is mashma from the Tur that he's aser even to sell to one of those people. If you look in the Drisha on the Tur, he explains that's the mashmos of the Ramah. And the Drisha says it's made a svara of those who are matir in mechila is not because you have it means the Drisha. Over there he explains that the svara of the people who are matir in mechila is because obviously the only reason he's selling is because he's pressured for cash, so you don't want to squeeze him more. But when he wrote it in the Smeh, he wrote that the reason is because mechila is a suffix if it's going to end up turning out to be the problematic one or not. Well, let's continue with the Drisha, because in the Smeh it's very short. In the Drisha he expanded it more. Over there he goes into a discussion about renting to a guy bichlal. He brings the shit of the Mordechai, that renting to a guy which is not a professional, not a uman that's going to do his business as mutter. Why? Because you're not sure if he's going to actually turn to become a hezek, since nobody is Eikam, for sure not B'Yisrael, who's not a uman. And the Mordechai holds that it's even if you have a Jew who's willing to pay the same price, you are allowed to rent to him. But if it comes to selling, then when you have a Yid and a Goy and they're both offering the same price, you have to sell it to the Yid.
This applies, right? This applies. This is what the Mordechai says.
Yeah.
You're allowed to rent a Goy over Yid.
Yeah. That's what the Mordechai does. The Rosh disagrees. The Rosh says even to rent is aser. If there's a Yid who's willing to pay the same price. Now, and there's a book V'yilakit Yosef, which was written also in the same style of the Knesset Agdela, a couple generations later, to, so to speak, complete what came out after the Knesset Agdela, to complete what he says over here. And on this Siman he writes that even, let's say the guy gives, the Yid is willing to give the value, and the guy wants to give more than the value. In that case, the Rosh would hold that you have to give, even if the guy wants to give more than the value, but the Yid wants to give the actual value, then you have to give it to the Yid and not to the guy. But and it means give it to the Yid and not to the guy who is willing to pay more. Even by your oman. But if the person or somebody who's not a uman versus not uman also. He says if the person who's not a uman is offering less than market value, for the rent or for the purchase, and the person who's a uman is offering market value or above, then you could give it to the uman.
The Mordechai agrees that the sell, you always have to give it to the Yid. The Mordechai agrees that the sell,
yeah, only for renting is different.
Even if he's offering, even if the guy's offering more.
Yeah, so this is where the V'yilakit Yosef comes in. He says that this about offering more only applies when you offer above market value. Not when the one that's less problematic is offering below market value. Why is that? He says the proof for it is from Hilchas Matzronos, which we're going to be learning down the line. In סימן Kuf Ein Hey Sif Chav Gimel, the Mechaber writes that if the Lekeach, who wants to buy the property, brings better coins that could be much easier to use, better money, than the Matzrin, not more money, just better quality of coins that are easier to spend, then you could sell to the Lekeach and you don't have to sell to the Matzrin. And the reason is that the Matzrin, that the Moicher doesn't have to absorb any form of loss. If he's going to have these coins which are not so good, he's going to have to deal with the headache of dealing with it. The Ramah says the same thing applies.
Then, if so, by renting, you're going to pay less, the same price, and the other guy, the can't want to pay more. Also,
no. So the Ramah says the same thing applies. The whole davar sheyesh pseida lamoicher lo tiknu b'zeh schus lamatzah. Only if there's a loss to the moicher. Seems like the Lakhat Yosef understands. What does it mean, loss to the moicher? Loss to the moicher means that it goes below market value, not that one person is offering market value, one person is offering more. And that's why over here he seems to imply that if the person is offering, one person is only giving you more profit, but it's not, you're not losing from it, then you have to, you should sell to the Yid or to the non-Uman versus the Uman. But if the other person is offering market value and you're not, then you could sell to the person who's offering you market value.
Why does the Yid not go? Where does that Isser come from?
First of all, Yid and Goy should not be neighbors mitzad the chashash that is going to kill him, or because they're going to be a bad influence, or because in the Jewish neighborhood, the Kiva writes in Ende Pamanizov, also in Hilchis Matzronis, that putting a Goy in a Jewish block is awesome.
So would that change how much the Goy is paying?
Because then it becomes that Dinei Matzronis don't apply when there is a hefset.
But why are you saying it's Dinei Matzronis?
So no, he's bringing a proof from Dinei Matzronis. The Lakhat Yosef is bringing a proof from Dinei Matzronis that as long as there's no hefset to the Meicher, then, or to the Masker, then he should pick the one that's less of a problem, even if he's not going to make as much profit. But if there's a hefset, he doesn't have to absorb a hefset for this purpose. I just said that Rabbi Kiva and the Pamanizov say that when it comes to the Jewish area, there's certain things, it's a bigger problem to rent, to sell to a guy. In time, Dinei Matzronis I'm talking about. Anyways, back to the dinner of Mechira. Yeah, it's according to the Smeh that the reason why you're allowed to sell is because maybe he's buying it for a nachla, maybe he's buying it to lahaskir, maybe he's buying it to live over there. It obviously implies that if the guy comes over to you and tells you clearly, I would like to buy the property because I want to build over here my office, and I'm not planning on moving from the other neighborhood, but I believe that this block and this chutzner is a ripe place for my business, then you're not allowed to. But if you look at what the Smeh writes in Drisha, that it's because mitnei dochkoi, then lav dafka, that it's still going to be aser. The Avni Choshen asks a simple question. He says, why? He goes back to the whole, that what the Ramah says, that a seicher is aser, but a moicher, they tell him sell, and after he's going to go to Bezdin. So he asks a simple question. He says, why don't you say by a seicher also go to Bezdin? Why don't you tell the person, rent it out to whoever you want, and if it's going to turn into a problem, they'll guys knock each other out in Bezdin later. So he says, he doesn't say it's because of Bari Azaker or not Bari Azaker, because it's a Suffolk or not. He just says very simply, he says, by a Seicher, it's much easier for one person to say, listen, I have no patience of dealing with this guy, to start going to Bezdin. You're going to rent it out, and it doesn't explain why, but the logic behind it is, the way I understand it is, by a Seicher is renting for 1 year, for 2 years, you're going to have to deal with this headache every few years. So therefore, you're not going to want to deal with this headache, and the person can say, I'm not interested in the whole Bezdin circus. The person who's buying a house, it's for long term. So if it's going to be a problem, you'll deal with him in Bezdin afterwards. The Bar Heitev, Sifkot and Hey, on the next Sif, brings from the Knesset Agdela on a Goysa Tur Oizvav, in the name of Tshuvas HaGoyim, that if a person wants the general thing, if a person wants to rent to a shochen ra, to a bad person, or to a goy, b'chlal, you could be ma'akev. And based on that's, it could be ma'akev, it could be a problem. Now, if you have a Jew who is Mechal Shabbos, or a Jew who refuses to come to Beis Din, or a Jew who's a Gval Alim, or any of these things, seems like it's also usher, because the only logic way that Amos says you're allowed to sell to a Yid is because it's going to be Tzayis Dinah. If a person knows it's not going to be Tzayis Dinah, you have the same problem. You have the same problem.
Is that how it translates Shachin Ra? Shachin Ra is like...
No, Shachin is a general thing.
What's the fine Shachin Ra?
Huh?
What's the fine Shachin Ra? Nasty dude.
Someone who puts his garbage in front of your house? I don't know. Whatever Shachin Ra means, I have no idea. Now, obviously, if we could go just based on the Ramah, that it's Medina of Tzayis Dinah or Leit Tzayis Dinah, then it implies that you are allowed to sell if the person he doesn't have it's not his umnus, right? And so you're allowed to sell to a Yid who's Mechal Shabbos, you're allowed to sell to a person who's Leit Tzayis Dinah, you're allowed to sell to a guy if it's Einum Nasei Bekach. Obviously, when there's no Yid who wants to buy it. Yeah. So but however, we still have the tashbetz we spoke about a couple of shiurim ago, that having a bad spiritual influence is enough of a reason to be ma'akev. So therefore, if it would be enough reason to be ma'akev, you might have a svara to be ma'akev certain elements from moving into your property. Now, the Mechaber continues into Seif Beis, moving to Seif Beis. If one person wants to open a store in his chatzah, yeah, and the Shchenim could be moiche and say they're not interested because they can't sleep because of the noise of the people that are marching in and out within the chatzar. But he could do whatever malacha he wants in his house and then sell in the marketplace. That means he's not bringing the people to his house, but he's doing it in his house and then going and selling it elsewhere. And if he was machzik, for the noise that he makes within his house, for creating his products, then it's not a problem. Then you can't be moiche against that, because a person, if he was already machzik, you can't be moiche against him. The Ramah says that anything that's done in the house you can't be moiche, even lechatchila. And the Tzemach right away points out that the Yeshayim of the Ramah is that you don't even need a chazaka. You don't have to ask about a chazaka. You could lechatchila go ahead and do whatever noise you want in your house, not like the Mechaber. The Mechaber is that the only time you could do koila patish in your house is only if you have a chazaka. Now, why is it that the chazaka helps over here? We learned in the previous Siman regarding kaitash harifos that chazaka for the noise doesn't help. So the Tzemach right away explains to you is very simple. Over here, by the kaitash harifos, it's not only noise; it's also shaking the karka, shaking the walls. So that hezek is considered a hezek gadol that you cannot be machzik and you could be ma'akev. Over here, we're just talking about noise that you're doing in your own house. If noise you're doing in your own house, a person could do a chazaka, could be moiche, and could do a chazaka. By kaitash harifos, he doesn't have to be moiche because there is no chazaka. So now comes the shaila, why when it comes to the noise of a hammer, you can't be. It's not such a big. It's also a big hezek. Why can't you be ma'akev just a noise? So the Tzemach explains in the next Sifkot and Yud that he says, I already explained in Prisha that you cannot be ma'akev somebody from doing something in his own house, but to be ma'akev people from coming in, that you could be ma'akev. But that's a svara which is problematic. Yeah? I'm assuming to get to the problem with the svara. That is because of that. That only fits according to the Ramah, not according to the Mechaber. That you can't, because according to the Mechaber, you could be moiche on koila patish meikara. So the svara of the Tzemach, why you can't be moiche la'acher ma'aseh is not a proper explanation. Now, by the way, the Nesivos over here quotes Nesivus over here, Bi'urim Sifkot and Aleph. He's the one who asks the question that I just said. He says it's only according to the Ramah, that only according to the Ramah you can't be ma'akev. The reason is because you're doing good bevesei. But according to the mechaber that you could be moiche, it's not the reason why after 3 years or after a chazaka, or whatever the chazaka is, according to the Rambam, the chazaka is Ra b'niskei, Hikr b'niskei. So what's the reason why you cannot be moiche after 3 years? And he says it's different. He says when you're talking about the people entering and exiting, then you can't be moiche, you can't be machzik, because the people entering and exiting are not the same people every day. So could be, I could say, as long as I saw that the people coming to your business are the upper class people, I wasn't moiche. They went, they didn't chew gum, they didn't leave it on the street, they didn't throw their garbage on the street, so I was fine with it. Now that you started selling a different kind of clothing, or whatever it is, and you're attracting the different element of society, I'm not comfortable with it. You can't be machzik on other people. You can be machzik on the people that are there. So koil apatish, the reason you could be machzik is because I can't say that for the first 3 years I was able to handle the noise of the hammers, but year number 4 I suddenly can't handle it anymore. Obviously we're not talking about a chayla, the Rambam says chayla is different. So that's why you could be machzik for that. I mean, the lashon of the nesivus is koil hapatish echad hu. It's the same noise the whole time. And he says, and that is actually the reason that the Asma himself brings in Prisha. Not like he writes over here. Which means, according to the way the Nesivus explains it, based on the Prisha, is that the noise, that the chazaka of noise is not that he's machzik the kind of work that he's doing, but he's machzik on the kind of noise that he's doing. Which means that if I make a specific malacha and there's a certain amount of noise, and noise today could be measured with decibels, and then I change the machinery, could be in the chazaka is bottle. I don't know. According to the Nesivus, the way he understands it, could be the chazaka would be bottle. He says the reason why by a patish you can't do it weiter is because you can't because the noise is the same. But if the noise is not the same, maybe not. Maybe you can't do it. There's other thing that's mashma from the Nesivus is that if you have the same people going in every single day, or you have specific people, let's say you have whether it's a physical therapist or whether it's a therapist, some therapists have clients coming to them for 25 years in a row, but you have people that come, or whatever it is, that there are specific people coming every day. Then if the same people are coming for the first 3 years, if you need such a chazaka, then it should work. Even by this, because it's not different people coming and going. If that's what it means, but that's the implications that I see from it. The Gra over here points out in Sifkot and Tes that when it comes to koil hapatish, the noise of the hammer, if a person kodam v'samach beheter before the nizak was there, and the person who's a nizak can't come and afterwards and say, I can't sleep because of the noise of the hammer. But the shach is mitzayin to a tshuva of the Maral Bach. And over there, Maral ben Chavim, Siman Tzadik Zayin. And he doesn't say what it says in that tshuva. That tshuva is then, a piece of it is now quoted in Knesset Agdela, a piece of it is quoted in the Chassam Sefer, which we're soon going to discuss. I'm first going to go with the Knesset Agdela quotes from him. Quotes one Nekuda, which is, I don't think that's what the Shach is specifically referring to. But the Knesset Agdela goes by Sefkot and Zayin says, brings from this Maral Bach, that this taina of noise that you, according to the mechaber, that you could be moiche, and therefore you need to have a chazaka, is only that is only in a mavui sasum or one chatzar, and not just chotzer like it says in the Mechaber. Mechaber just says chotzer, but the Malbach says also applies to mavoi sasum. But in two chatzeres which are open to a mavoi mefulish, or they're not open to the same mavoi, then one cannot be ma'akev for the noise of the hammer, and alachas kam v'kamo can't be ma'akev from the noise of nichnasim v'yotzim, which the Maralbach says is a bigger hezek than the bigger because he says that the nezek of patish is a bigger noise, more constant hezek than the hezek of people coming and going, as opposed to the swat of the nesivos. Well, that's what the Maralbach explains, that the patish is a bigger chiddush. The noise of the patish, you can't be ma'akev, for sure you can't be ma'akev even those when it comes to two separate chatzeres. Pischat Shuvah, now we're going to move to the Chasam Sofer that we mentioned before. Pischat Shuvah over here, first Pischat Shuvah in the סימן brings a Shuvah Chasam Sofer was regarding a person who owned a 2-story house. And he passed away. He was moirish to his kids his house. And the way the Yerusha was divided was 2 brothers got the top floor, and 1 brother got the bottom floor. This is Chasam Sofer סימן Tzadik Beis. And now one of the people upstairs wants to open up a store, let's open up a bar. Calls it a chanus, a place to sell mashke, but people should come to him. And the one downstairs wants to be ma'akev and says, I'm not interested. The Rav who asked the question said that according to Svare, he could be ma'akev because it's like a chanus. He could say, I can't sleep mikol nichnasim v'ayotzim. But he says, I have a svara why you can't be ma'akev, because when it's talking about kol nichnas, kol any yachal lishain, it's talking about in the days of the Gemara. In the days of the Gemara, stores are open at night. Today, these things, it's not going to be open at night. It's only going to be open during daytime. It's only going to be open during daytime. The store is going to be closed at night. L'chayra should be mutter. But he says the majority of poskim don't make that differentiation, but still it's a svara. But the Rav who asked the question of the Chasam Sofer, I think it was a relative of the Chasam Sofer, did not want to make a psak because he didn't want to deal with the situation that people are going to say the Rav blocked Pliny and Pliny from having his parnaseh, and now because of that he's busy fundraising on the street to support his family, and therefore I can't, and they're going to bashmutz the Rav. So he said, I don't want to pass on that. He dumped it on the Chasam Sofer, the Chasam Sofer, you deal with the problem. So the Chasam Sofer says, first of all, it could be moicha. And he says that when the Gemara says any yachalisha, and it's not referring to only night, he says, could be during daytime also. The amount of noise confuses a person. It's because bilbul, ein loy monoyach machmas bilbul akoil. He doesn't have peace and quiet because of this. Also, even if the store is only open during daytime, workers come to the store before the store opens. Early in the morning. At that point, there's still people sleeping over there in the house. So it's also a problem. So then he says, but parnas is a mitzvah, which I mentioned before. And there's a mitzvah lefan is b'nei beis. Right? So therefore, maybe you could do it mitzvah parnas, because he said the guy's going to lose his parnas, he's going to have to start fundraising. So he says that the dvar mitzvah that we're talking about is not every mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. The definition of a mitzvah is a mitzvah, because before we discussed what the shit of the Taz, the definition of a mitzvah is a mitzvah which cannot be done without a crowd, and something that people have to come to you. The Chasam Sofer says the definition of a mitzvah is something which every person has an obligation, and if you're not going to do it, the mitzvah is going to become batal. 2 definitions for mitzvah.
Other people
are chayev, yeah. So tinok shel beis rabban, every person is chayev to educate his kids, and if you're not going to have a teacher, the kids are going to dreizach and misbatel from learning. So therefore, such a thing you can't be ma'akav. But parnasas b'nei beisoy, it's not an obligation on the rest of the l'shchenim to support you. It's your obligation to take care of your own kids. So why should they suffer for your mitzvah?
I think Ktanim is a mitzvah to everyone. Ktanim is a mitzvah to l'shchenim, let's say they don't have any kids.
No, Ktanim has to be Ktanim has to be is a mitzvah that is not going to be nizbatel. If you don't do it, it's going to become batel, and it's a responsibility for everyone. Chinuch Ketanim is a responsibility on the crowd. Hilchos Talmud Torah, it doesn't mention them here, but Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Alter Rebbe, V'chal is based on Shulchan Aruch, that Chinuch Ketanim is a mitzvah on everybody.
The father isn't teaching, or?
Father isn't teaching, yeah.
Tzedakah,
Tzedakah is also chiyuv on everybody, but not parnassus bnei beisim. Tzedakah is very little. Or the chiyuv tzedakah. Parnassus bnei beisim is a chiyuv on the father. Therefore, it's not considered enough of a mitzvah that the person can't be moicha and say, I don't want you to do this because it's going to be a shaila of parnassa. And then the Chazon Sofer says that Taka, according to the Maralbach, that the Shach mentions. What is the Maralbach? He quotes a different part of the Maralbach. Over there, the Maralbach says that Chazaka. The Maralbach explains why does Chazaka not help by a chanus? Yeah, because the Shach says the Shach brings from the Hagoyes Ashri that when it comes to chanus and the chatzir, Chazaka does help, even for ribui nichnasim v'yotzim. But the Mechaber doesn't bring the Hagoyes Ashri. The Malbach says that Chazaka does not help. Why is that? Why? What?
You're very confused by that, Shach. You saying about everything besides for crypto-investigation?
Pretty much. Yeah, it all boils down to if ribui nichnasim v'yotzim is a big hezek or not. But he says that chanus ribui nichnasim v'yotzim you could do it. He brings the Hagoyes Ashri, you could, and he says look in the Maralbach. The Chayra that what he says look in the Maralbach is because the Maralbach says that Chazaka does not help in such a thing. Why? Because it causes a lot of traffic. But noise in the house, Chazaka does help. He explains why. He says the difference between the two is because noise in the house is not something you can do in the marketplace. You have to take your stuff, and the marketplace opens in the morning, closes at night. So you have to sew all your clothing at night, and you have to bring it to the marketplace during the day. So therefore, the selling, the traffic, that you could do elsewhere. So therefore, Chazaka doesn't help. But the noise that you're making, you cannot do in the shuk, and therefore Chazaka does help if you're moiche, and then if Chazaka does help if there's no mecha, if you're machzik. And therefore, he says over here that the main parnasa this guy is going to have is not from selling mashke in the street, in the marketplace, but rather from people coming. And he says they're coming to sit down and to have a drink and to release their fears. That's the lashon of the Chasam Sofer. So maybe you can't be moiche because it's something that can't be done in the shuk according to the Maralbach. Yeah, he brings out as a svara. He says the maskani you could be moiche. Yeah. So according to this Maralbach, that
According to Maralbach,
you cannot be moiche. So therefore, in the case of the bar, you shouldn't be able to be moiche. And the Chasam Sofer then says, he brings it as a svara, the maskani says he could be moiche. Now, based on this Maralbach, which we just mentioned now, that the chazaka could be done on anything which you could only do in your house, and you cannot do outside the house. So the chayra, if it's something which is not regularly sold, people dafka come to the house, it's not regularly sold outside. Whether it is you make a special certain courses, or certain things that are imported and they only sell small amounts, special imports, וכיו, you cannot be ma'akev somebody from having such a store. Or somebody who has gmachs for, not mamash, gmach might be a mitzvah, but somebody who has like specific clothing that are only available by order or whatever it is. It's not usually done in a store. It's usually people have it in their own houses, especially in Eretz Yisrael or in certain from neighborhoods, and you can't be moiche about it. But that's just a svara.
When would you not be able to do it in your house?
Mm-hmm.
Or in another place, no?
No, it's not usually done over there. Now, what I mentioned before, the Chasam Sofer doesn't holds that even during the day you cannot. I'm moving to the next thing. Kesef HaKodesh. Kesef HaKodesh. Well, I mentioned the Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer says that you can't move. That when it says the Gemara says any yochalishin also applies during daytime because people could have don't have menucha because of all the noise. The Kesef HaKodesh says adds something to it. He says you could be ma'akev on any kind of store that's open, even during daytime. He says, because first of all, three reasons. First of all, kama anoshim yishenim shenas tzarayim gam bechol bekeva. Something you don't see in America, but it's mostly in Europe and South America. People do take afternoon naps on a regular basis, every day. Second of all, after nighttime, when people come back from work, when is the busiest time in the stores? Not during the day. Right by the end, bein hashmashas, people have just finished their work and they're heading back home, and that's when they pick up whatever they have to buy. So therefore, in that time, there's much more people going, and by then there's already people sleeping. And the last thing is, this is something also which is not common today, but back in the day it was, and somebody had the grocery store in the neighborhood, and you needed emergency milk at night. You'd go, you'd knock, something happened, or whatever it is, you forgot to buy something, and you needed mamash at night. You go, you knock on the door, take the key, get whatever you want. So there'll be people coming and going, given at night. Those are three reasons the Kesef HaKachim gives, and therefore, even a store which is officially opened only during the day, you could still be ma'akev. Now, the Bar Heitiv, Sifkot and Hey over here brings in the Knesset Agdela, Hagoyes Atur Ois Hey, that brings in the Chuvas Agoinim.
The last two things that the Kesef would just say that make sure to close them before 7, whatever. The last two things that the Kesef says, you could just...
Yeah, you could avoid it by doing it, yeah. If your neighbor doesn't sleep during the day, yeah. You have to just do the research. If somebody says, I don't want the store to open next door to me because I'm not going to be able to handle the noise, and then you do your research and you find out that this guy's working in Manhattan every day from he leaves his house at 7:30 a.m. and he's back home at 8 p.m. Did I take up? Right? What relevance is there? He's not taking a nap in the middle of the day. And even if he does, it's in his office, not in his house. Now, the Bar Heitiv Sifkot and He brings in the Knesset Agdela Gasatul Ois Hey, which he brings the name of Chuvas Agoinim, that you cannot, that the person, Shchenim could be ma'akev somebody from opening a hotel in their, a person a punduk, a inn, people who come 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, but to be masqueraded for a month or for a year is not a problem. Basically, it's the same nekuda of oivrim v'shavim. Knesset Agdela also says, in Agos Atur Sifkot and Dalad, in the name of Marashdam, Mispat סימן Reish Samach Zayin, that all these dinim are not about chanus and everything else. All these restrictions are not only somebody who wants to open a store, but also somebody who wants to expand his business. Which means, if a person had a small operation and the Shchenim had no problem with it, and he was machzik boif in a moil, maybe he got the shus from all the Shchenim, but now he wants to expand his business. Now there's going to be a lot more people coming. So then he could still be ma'akev. It means the chazakah only applies to what he was machzik on. And the fact is maybe they were machzik to have a small store, and they have no problem because only 10 people come a day. But if it's going to turn into a big store, it could become a problem. That's also another nekuda from the Knesset Agdela. It's at what? Yeah, but over here it's talking about mitzad the hezek. If you are machzik the hezek, then it only applies to what you are machzik on. You can't go weiter. Not opening a second store. It's more like expanding your own store, bringing more people to come. Now, I don't have. There's no need to mention it, but it's obvious. It's obvious that all these things that it says that you're allowed to do, that you're not allowed to do that according to the Ramah, you're not allowed to be ma'akev. You're not allowed to be ma'akev somebody from doing a malach in his house. Obviously, it's not talking about the malachas, which the previous Siman discusses that you're not allowed to do. If it's a good and kavua, avak, offer, all these things which has a gadol. We're not talking about those things. So you don't have to mention that. And also, another thing is that when it comes to noise, even according to Mechaber, that you have to be machzik the noise, it doesn't apply to noise machmasdira, which you mentioned in the previous Siman also. You can't say I don't want kids running around. You can't say I don't want your washing machine to run. You can't say these kinds of things which are tzarech dira. There is a concept called gezel shena which doesn't appear anywhere in the Poskim. However, Shuvas Keren LaDavid, Chaim סימן Yutches says there's isur medeiraisa to wake somebody up while he's sleeping. You don't call gezel shena; it's isur deraisa. And the Keren LeDavid, Oirachaim Siman Yutches. So therefore, even if mitzadin l'shchenim, you just have to be careful in the amount of noise that you make. Now we're going to continue to Sif Gimel. Now, there's a big machlekes if the heter in the Gemara is only for T'negel Shel Beis Rabban or also for other mitzvahs. And the Beis Yosef goes through all of it. And Beis Yosef is machliya that that's for every dvar mitzvah. And that's what the Mechaber writes over here, that you're allowed to teach T'negel Shel Beis Rabban in your house. We're talking about teaching Torah, and nobody could be ma'akev the other person with a taina that he can't sleep, and definitely not to be ma'akev a taina that people are coming and going. And the same thing applies to anything of mitzvah that you cannot be moicha. The Smes Sivkot Yud Gimel points out, he says, the Mechaber over here doesn't put a limit on how many kids you could have in your class. You could, in your house, you could even have more than 50, not like the Ramban. The Ramban is Medaik from Rashi, the Ramban is born in Beis Yosef. Ramban is Medaik from Rashi, it's only up to 50. The Gra in Sivkot Yud Beis over here says, even the Chatchila, you're allowed to start doing it, even if the Chatchila you're going to cause noise, you're going to cause Ribun Yichnas and B'yotzim. However, this is not from the Gra, but just to point out, ultimately, this heter is only for something which is part of the mitzvah, not a general global heter. So even if something is mutter, there are things around it which could be blocked, which could be stopped. For example, the fact that you could have a class with kids, maybe the parents come with their strollers or whatever it is, and the teacher leaves them outside in the hallway, you could block it. Yeah, you could see, it could be moicha against it. That's not part of the mitzvah. But if the person's having a class in the house, let them have the strollers in the house also. Stam is an example. Also, since it's only T'negel Shel Beis Rabban, so babysitting service doesn't count for that. What?
What was the first thing? If you had a class that doesn't have a stroller?
You have stroller outside, you can't. They could be ma'akev, the strollers, they can't be ma'akev the class. Now, if it's mamash a babysitting service not learning Torah and there's no chiyuv chinuch for a 1-year-old, then maybe you could still be ma'akev, because the only heter of Dvar Mitzvah starts when they're teaching Torah. Otherwise, it's the same thing as not teaching, as teaching Modechel or not teaching anything b'chlal. So that's also another point. Now, the Ritva in Siman Chav Zayin, which is born in the Beis Yosef, says that the same thing applies to Beis Medrash, where you teach Torah l'Rabim. The Beis Yosef takes this Ritva and understands from this Ritva that every mitzvah you can't be ma'akev. However, the Knesset Agdela in Madura Basra, Hagoyes Beis Yosef Ois Aleph, the same thing it says that the Ritva's reason is not because every mitzvah. The Ritva's reason is because the heter for T'negel Shel Beis Rabban applies to any kind of teaching Torah. That means it's not a global heter to every mitzvah. The Ritva's shitta is that teaching Torah has an exception. Every form of teaching Torah is mutter. Pasuk is everything, yeah. The Erech HaShulchan says also the same reason, but he says L'maiseh, ultimately the Mechaber paskened any kind of mitzvah, and the majority of the Rishonim pasken any kind of mitzvah, and the majority of Achreinim, and therefore he says you could for any kind of mitzvah. Erech HaShulchan says the same thing applies to a dayan who does the Torahs in his house, because they call it din emes la'mitoi. It establishes the world, and therefore one can't be ma'akev a din Torah in his house. And he says, you have the Taz that says that it depends on whether you could do it in someplace else or not. And the din Torah, if you have two people in dispute, you could go to their houses. Why do you have to bring them to your house? He says, no. He says, I don't hold of the Taz's chiluk. He says anything which is mitzvah is mutter, nothing to do with whether people have to come to you, or you could do it in somebody else's house. Erech Lechem. On Erech HaShulchan, Erech HaShulchan on here. Erech Lechem is much earlier. Erech HaShulchan is later. The Shevet HaLevi, the big chiddush in Chelik Zayin, Siman Reish Chav Daled, that all the heter of T'negel Shel Beis Rabban and yeshivas and everything else is only during daytime hours and the beginning of the night. Why? Because if you look in Yeridea, Siman Shin, where it discusses the Hilchas Talmud Torah, it says the hours of learning Torah where they teach the kids during daytime hours and a little bit of the night. So therefore, you can't say that the heter applies to opening up a yeshiva which operates at 12 o'clock at night also. And you could be ma'akev. Shas Tshuvas Salmas Chaim to Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, the Rav in Yerushalayim, when there was a discussion about opening up schools, when the Tzionim started opening up Freie schools, or they called it Frum schools, but they were corrupting the youth, and there was a need to open up a school. And he said over there that opening up a school is the same thing next to people's houses, is the same thing as opening in the same chotzer, and you cannot be ma'akev because of school. And over there, it's talking about over there those days they were talking about schools for boys, and there's also a sweater for schools for girls. He says because it's a tikkun l'rabim. It's a big tikkun that the kids shouldn't dreizach and end up in the wrong chinuch. The Levush Sif Gimel adds something which is not mentioned in other places. It's brought in the Pesach Tshuva in Sifkot and Beis, but the Levush says, and when the Ramah says you could do, and the Mechaber says you could do any mitzvah, you can't be ma'akev any mitzvah, it's talking about within the same chatzah. But within the same house you could be ma'akev. That means if two people share a house, and each one's renting one room, one person could be ma'akev somebody else from bringing kids into the house and taking over the dining room. That you could be ma'akev. Which implies that the heter of Tineke Shel Beis Rabban is a specific heter for noise and for ribu nichnasim v'yotzim in the chatzah. It's not a global heter that every hezek you could think of becomes cancelled. If there'll be another hezek, whether it's a lot more garbage piling up or other things, then you could be ma'akev. It's not only that the swar of the levush, which is that something which is this he doesn't explain it that way, but that seems like a swar of the levush, is that only things which are part. There's the heter for Tineke Shel Beis Rabban was that they told you you can't claim that you're bothered by the noise of kids learning Torah or bachrim learning Torah. But there's other kinds of nezekas you could be bothered by. The fact that there's garbage and things like that, you could be bothered by it, and therefore you could be moiche, and you could block it until the school takes care of the garbage problem.
Which is not what you have in the house. Which is not what you have in the house. That you don't have in the chatzar.
That you don't have in what?
Which is not what you have in the house more than the chatzar. You said the bush is only matter in the chatzar.
The chatzar, because the chatzar only have ribu nichnasim v'yotzim. In the house, I'm not interested in ribu nichnasim v'yotzim to my dining room. He says that people usually sit in Beis HaChoyre if people live in the same place together, warmer places, everybody moves into one place. Now, if somebody wants to open up a shul or kollel, a school or whatever is inside an apartment building, what's the din? Al pi svaras ataz, it's something which is done. That's something which could be done outside. You could be ma'akev, right? Because usually schools and shuls and kollels are not in an apartment building in somebody's apartment, unless it's needed for the people in the building. For whatever, that's a different reason. But usually you don't put it over there. You don't have residences in the same place. But again, it's maybe you can be ma'akev for the same svara. It depends on the svara. But if you say that every dvar mitzvah is, or something which, or like the erech hashulchan, or you say it's because of something which is going to be nisbatel, if it's not going to be done, like the chasam sefer, then the heter is even within the building. Now, all these azekas are hezek kavua. That means, if I do a sheva brachas in my house, or if I bring it, or anything of the sort, and it creates noise in an apartment building, it's not a problem. Sai mitzad the fact that everybody agreed that it should be, everybody wants to be able to do it themselves. Like the Alter Rebbe says that each one's meichel to other people for doing the same noise. Same thing, the other hazekas. Or mitzad the fact that it's arai, something which is not constant. Now, if you have, now over here, until now we all discussed regarding the l'shchenim could be ma'akev, can't be ma'akev, when it comes to these kinds of things, to open up a chanus, ribu nichnasim b'yotzim, they could be mon, could be ma'akev, there is a chazaka, there's no chazaka. The Gro, it says if you're kadam beheter, then you can't, for the koil apatish, you cannot be ma'akev anymore. So I remind you something which I discussed before, don't forget there's a concept of hezek of the rabbim. And the Magen Avram, which I also mentioned in the past, in Erechaim Kuf Nun Dalet towards the end, in Sifkat and Chav Gimel, brings the name of the Sheres Yetz. If somebody has a bathroom next to, near a shul, even if he was koydem to the shul, he has to remove it because it's hezek of hezek derabim, right? The only difference, so a shul could technically also be moiche against a something which is going to create more noise or more traffic around them. And if you think these shilas are not so common, even if I'm over Shem and Fulish, I'll just end with this, a story, two shilas that came to me. And with that we'll conclude the shir. First one is, there is a big simcha hall in some place in a certain neighborhood. But the simcha hall had an entrance to a certain street, to one street, to a main street, and behind the simcha hall is a parking lot. Whenever there's a simcha, the main street becomes blocked. It doesn't bother anybody, right? It's a main street. It's a main street. It's a big street. And from there you take a turn into the hall, but there's a lot of traffic. The hall wants to open up. Now the back of the parking lot is open towards, not open, but there's a gate towards a street, which is a mavoi she'eina mefulish. Or call it a mavoi. It's a dead-end street. It has houses on the two sides. The only people who come into the street are people who live there. They want to open up the gate over there, so there should be two entranceways to the parking lot. And I'm not sure if they sent us months or not, but it's probably going to end up in the entire, because they say until now, the only people who came to the block were us. Going weiter is going to be people that are going to Dreizig, people. There's already few people that park over there because there's no place in the parking lot or whatever it is. They park on their grass and they block the driveways. I think they ran over. They hit the kid ones also, and from the neighbors. But he says now, if we're going to open it up, it's going to become full traffic a whole night. It's going to be noise and everything else. The second is going to be a question of niskei of the people on the block claiming that they don't want their street to become a thoroughfare. And there's going to be actual hazekas from it. The second story is, if a person wants to, the second story which came also, a person wants to open up a store, or maybe, I think he wants to open up a simcha hall. A person wants to open up a simcha hall someplace. And the simcha hall is it's over here in Brooklyn, some places you have the shuls, sometimes you have the houses attached to each other, and sometimes you have the houses mamish like within a small place from each other. There's a shul which wants to open up a simcha hall, and it's going to be noise at night also. Chayim's, bar mitzvahs, whatever it is. And it's attached to another house. And the other house says, we're not maskim. You can only do daytime simchas, you can't do nighttime simchas. Because we want to go to sleep. The shul says, we're willing to put noise barriers inside the shul to absorb all the noise. They said, no, we still have a problem because we don't want cars, the street, double parking and everything else. Is that a shaila? That's almost both. These two cases are probably going to end up added in Torah at some place or another, or at least in front of it of. But just as you know, these two shailas came to me within the last 2 weeks. And Hilchas Niskei Shchein are relevant to this סימן. You can't say that having a simcha hall is a mitzvah. Because getting married is a mitzvah. But getting married, you only need 10 people. You don't need 100 people, and you don't need music that even people inside go deaf from it, and people outside also. If people inside go deaf, people outside are almost deaf. So that's why it's lav dafka that you could say that it's begeder of a mitzvah. These are stories that come up, and if you're going to be in the field, you're going to hear these questions coming up all the time. With that, we conclude.